Hello everyone, my name is Luke, and if you don't know me, which I'm assuming you don't because this is my first video, I'm a third year college student that is about to enter into their first year of medical school. I know, wild, right? As I've been reflecting over my time in undergrad, I want to share my story about my Christian club at school and how it's affected me. So strap in and get some snacks. It was through this club that my faith would be unrecognizable by the end of college. When I became Christian, at first my faith was mine and mine alone. Even though I would go to church as a kid, it wasn't until the pandemic that I became really Christian. When I was alone in my room reading the Bible, Jesus' character would come to life for me, and I felt like God was speaking to me through the Bible. In addition to this, whenever I was alone, I would just have a casual conversation with God. Hey God, why did you make the sky so cool? Do you know you are even cooler? And so, for the start of my Christian walk, I highly valued my alone time with God because that's where I got to know Him intimately. So, for the first couple of years of my walk with the Lord, my faith was only really expressed to God. Despite that, God was slowly showing me a broader part of my faith. As I went through his high school, growing with the Lord alone, I saw how most of the commands God has for His people are relational. And I don't mean God and His relationship with someone, but rather person to person relational. This newfound revelation made me aware of the lack of community I had in my life. Even though I went to church, because of my parents' divorce and their own respective church experiences, we were really detached from a church community. Additionally, my dad and mom's families were also really disconnected with my extended family. I also realized I never experienced an intimate school friendship where I was able to truly express my faith to someone. I felt like I wasn't really being my true self with others, like I was putting on a fake persona that wasn't me. This brought a lot of dissonance as I was growing with the Lord. I loved the Lord so much that that became a core part of who I was. And so I wanted to share that love with others, but I did not feel I had any real spaces or the kind of people that I could do that with. So, going into college, that was a big goal to find a community and gain friendships where I truly can be me and express my faith with others. I was really excited to join some kind of community or club. I don't know about y'all, but when I think about college, I would think about all the clubs, fraternities, sororities, and just the different events that would occur. I presumed that those kind of experiences are what made up your college experience. I think the best example for how I thought college was is Monsters University. You know, when Mike first steps onto campus and he just sees a ton of students running around and just enjoying themselves? Seeing the student life brimming with excitement and joy as a kid was my genuine expectation for college. I remember going to my school's orientation and being thrilled by how open people were with getting to know new people. I was genuinely so happy that I got to talk with like three people. I know three people doesn't sound like a lot, but I felt like those people were potential friends I could be true to. So my school's orientation gave me hope. I thought that if this is how my school is during the year, I will have no trouble finding friends that I can express myself to others. But September rolled around, and my hopes and expectations were diminished. To start, I found that the people in my program to be very hard to connect to. I was in this BSDO program, which is basically this fast track program where you're guaranteed admission to med school if you hit certain requirements. And because I was in this program, I had like 70 other pre-med students who were in a lot of my similar classes. Whenever I tried to connect with them, I found a lot of the guys to be very immature and hard to talk to. And while the girls were also a lot easier to talk to, they will also only really talk about gossip and just also overstress and complain about school and academics and grades and all of that. It wouldn't just be a simple, oh my gosh, this class is so tough, I'm scared and stressed. That's a normal response. The best way I could describe it would be a constant ah until the exam, and it was only amplified by the other girls also stressing. No amount of reassurance could calm anyone. So trying to be friends with people there was a bit of a dud, but I still had some sense of hope for finding a community. If I couldn't be with people in my class, I would just find a club. There are two things I forgot to mention about my school. One, it's a commuter school, which means there's a culture of students coming to campus for their classes and immediately bolting to their cars to leave afterwards. My school even had it to shut down their dorms during the pandemic, so basically every single student was commuting. And number two, because of the pandemic, a lot of the clubs either died or significantly shrank. So by the time I joined the college around 2023, the clubs felt like hollow shells of themselves. I thought that clubs were meant to be places where people expressed a common interest. I remember going to the art club, thinking I was going to paint with others and talk about our deep passions for art. But instead, I found the club was just giving out pizza, talking about the e-board positions, and then inviting others to join the e-board if they wanted leadership positions. And then afterwards, they gave us 5 minutes to just color a printed out coloring sheet by ourselves. There was literally zero interaction planned for the event. At the start of the event, I sat down next to the student, and after like a minute of sitting down next to them, they just got up immediately to sit somewhere else. My mouth literally dropped open at the sight of that. After they gave out pizza, I saw a bunch of people that were not part of the club come in and just take a bunch of food like they're scavenging, and then they scurried off. The freaking pepperoni pizza ran out because of them. During the drawing time, I went up to someone and asked, "What are you drawing?" But then they just looked at me menacingly. In retrospect, I forgot that the art club only gave us like the same coloring paper, but still, right after the club ended, almost everyone just immediately dipped. The only people that stayed, funny enough, were my pre-med peers who were talking to the e-board for leadership positions. I thought it was low-key scummy, hosting an event just to get new leaders and not trying to create spaces for connection for the general body. Some of the leaders even came up to me and asked if I was interested, and I said no. And behind that no was a fury. I didn't want to be a leader of a club where cultivating a community was not the priority. What happened at the art club was happening at pretty much most of the clubs on my campus. I would attend, eat food alone, make efforts to connect with others, and fail, and then I would repeat that cycle for the next club. Any hope I had turned into despair. I felt betrayed by everyone, my school, the people in my program, the e-board leaders of the clubs that I attended, but deep down, I felt betrayed by God. The Bible is filled with love, and I felt so unloved by the surroundings I was in. Since high school, I've been praying about finding people who I can share my faith to, who I can share my true self to. So I knew for sure God knew my genuine desires, but I felt like he wasn't listening. Like he turned his back on me, also disdained my school as a result of it. I wish I went to a different school. I would hear from my friends who went to different colleges of how awesome their college experiences were, and I became so jealous. I also grew an annoyance to the people at my school. I thought they were just superficial bums who only cared about academics, food, and getting out of school as fast as possible. These things led me to self-isolate myself from others and grow complacent with my initial desires. Instead of sitting with this hurt and genuinely asking God, I would try to rationalize my experience of it. Maybe God was telling me he is enough for me. I already made it this far with him alone. Maybe that's just how it is. Maybe God was challenging me to depend on him more when I'm alone. I know that these thoughts weren't necessarily true. They had glimmers of truth to them, but ultimately, my thoughts were rooted in escapism. I was trying to find an answer to my uncomfortable reality that I might be alone for the next 3 years. One day, as I was contemplating my existence at this school, a stranger walked up to me. At first, I didn't even notice him. I got so accustomed to looking down that when he first approached me, I instinctively darted my eyes away from him, and I thought he was talking to someone else. But as he pressed into trying to get my attention, I finally opened my eyes to see what was truly happening. His eyes actually met mine. He introduced himself as Roger, and we started talking about life and various different things. Even though we initially were talking about mundane things, I felt my heart of stone crack. He actually cared about what I was saying and was sharing stuff about him. There was a part of me that thought, oh, what's the catch? Does he want me to just join his club's e-board or something? At the end of the conversation, Roger proceeded to ask if I wanted to come join him for a Bible study. And in my head, I was like, oh! And so I said, yeah, I have nothing better to do. And I just joined him. It was genuinely really sweet to just do something like that so randomly and spontaneously. And after we sat down for the Bible study, he told me about how he started up this small Christian club called InterVarsity, and he asked if I wanted to join. Immediately I asked him why did he name it InterVarsity, and he explained how it's the name of this national Christian organization, and its aim is to create communities of people following Jesus on college campuses. And then I was thinking to myself, like, huh? Literally word for word what I was asking God for years. And so I told him that I would love to join. And after that, I was a regular member. The club was relatively new, so there weren't that many people, but I think it made the environment a lot more vulnerable. It was in those spaces that I got to share my true self to others. I felt so encouraged and reassured. It was a small but a genuine club. They didn't have food all the time, but we were eating good with the Bible studies we had and just the conversations. Some of the leaders even invited me to a young adults group outside of the college, and so I got to really grow in those spaces. At some point, I was actually invited to join leadership. And no, it wasn't like any sort of shallow invitation that I received before. Before making the decision, Roger encouraged me to pray about the decision and to discern if this is something God really wanted for me. And so, as I reflected on my time in the club, I found myself meditating on different passages in the Bible. One passage that influenced my decision was the parable of the lost sheep. In this passage, the big religious figures at the time were questioning why Jesus was hanging out with the outcasted members of society. These guys were annoyed and grumbling, and when Jesus heard about their grumbling, he shares this fire parable. In this parable, there is a shepherd who has 100 sheep he's taking care of. One day, when the shepherd was out and about with his 100 sheep, one of the sheep goes missing. Instead of the shepherd cutting his losses and sticking with the 99 other sheep, the shepherd stays out all day and night looking for this lost sheep. And when the lost sheep was found, the lost sheep rejoined the flock, and the shepherd celebrated with all his friends, for the sheep he lost was finally found. On the surface, this passage shows the joy that Jesus has when someone lost spiritually finds his way back home with Jesus. I love how joyous the shepherd is when he finds the lost sheep. It's interesting how much happiness he had, because if it were me, I would have been annoyed to lose the sheep, and then I would still be annoyed after finding the sheep. But instead, there's this pure joy that the shepherd has. His joy is so profound because it lacks self-righteousness and judgment. When I compare the parable to my own college experience, I realized I was actually a lost sheep. I had no direction of what to do with myself. I had no community or flock to lean on in support. But I think in a deeper sense, I was lost in my own expectations and desires, that I even began to seeing false perceptions of God to just cope with my initial unanswered desires. It made me lose sight of Jesus, and I was allowing my own environment to dictate my approach to God and his people. I also realized a lot of other students probably experienced similar disappointments. We all probably had some sort of expectation when joining college, but when they failed, we grew complacent and hardened, which led all of us to be lost in some way. But through the outreach of Roger, who was just like the shepherd, he found me and brought me to InterVarsity. I got to join a flock, and I got to experience what it's like to follow Jesus with others on campus. And when I lived life more and more with them, was made more aware of how much love and intentionality the community following Jesus had with one another. I got to see just how much joy they had for me being with them. It got to the point that my heart started to change about my campus and the people there. I was excited to go to school. I was excited to see people in the club, old or new club members. I started to see the potential the campus actually had at developing community. I would look at literal corners of campus and picture how that area could be transformed by our community. It was through this reflection that I realized that it was through being part of a flock that was following Jesus that I actually learned what it meant to belong and the value of community. And being in community essentially restored what was broken when I was lost. No longer was I hopeless of my campus, but rather I saw my campus through the eyes of the Good Shepherd looking for his lost sheep. And no longer did I see people there as shallow, but rather I saw how they too longed for belonging, to be part of a flock, but instead they have hardened their hearts to cope with the reality of their campuses. When Jesus shared the parable about a good shepherd to the Pharisees, he was challenging them to unashamedly look out for the outcasted and bring them back to their communities. And it was through my reflection I felt invited to do the same. Just like Roger, I too could also act like the good shepherd to others on campus and find those who were genuinely lost and without God. And when I thought about it deeper, I would argue that acting like a good shepherd on campus was also a means to express my true faith to others. And when I recognized that, I realized how sovereign God was in my whole life. Through the years, he has always been teaching me how faith is intertwined with community and friendships through all of these experiences. It's an intrinsic part of the word faith. And it's through true faith, the faith to look out for the outcasted, that communities can genuinely represent love. And so I said yes to my invitation to be a leader in InterVarsity. For those of you that may be lost or unsatisfied with their college experiences, I would encourage you to genuinely sit with God in all those emotions you may be feeling. Before anything else, God is always there for you, and it may occur in ways you'd least expect, but trust that God holds everything in his hands. Maybe God is using someone to reach you in your situation. I would also encourage you to not let your circumstances harden your heart. I know how sad it can be when God doesn't answer you in ways you expect, but the last thing you need to do for yourself is to come up with irrational lies about God. I mean this in the most gentle way. Be honest with yourself and with God, and it's okay to be sad. Also, keep an eye out for a Christian club or community. Maybe your school has an InterVarsity or some Christian club that is longing for someone like you. God made this world for you. If you have trouble talking to God about your emotions, pray this prayer with me. Dear God, I'm so sad about my situation. I hate this school, and I'm frustrated with what I'm going through. Please, Lord, be my rest, my refuge in this troubling time. Amen. For those that are in communities, what would it look like to have a heart like the shepherd? How would your communities be transformed if you had eyes like the good shepherd? See, Roger acted out in faith and unashamedly found me out of love. And it was through that deep interaction of love that I was able to go out and find other students throughout my college career. Unconditional love has the power to make someone act more like Jesus. Consider this. What may be holding you back? Is it your heart posture toward others? Are you afraid? Are you also hardened by your circumstances and don't have hope that things can change? If that's you, pray this prayer with me. Dear God, Lord, give me a heart like yours, a heart that longs for your people, a heart that goes out of the way for the people I deem undeserving. Help me to see like you and love like you. Amen. So yeah, that's how God found me in college. And trust me when I say He wants to find you in college. Thanks for watching. Have a good day.